As anyone who's still loaded up on stress ulcers and student loan debt from medical school can tell you, it isn't easy being a doctor. It's a high-stress job where life and death are literally in your hands every single day. No pressure though. Still, it could be worse. You could be one particular doctor who has a stranger and more difficult life than all of the others. We're talking, of course, about SCP-049, an enigmatic avian entity known to the agents of the SCP Foundation as the Plague Doctor. To really understand why he had such a difficult life, and one that you really wouldn't want to trade with him for any amount of money, we can't start with his time as an inmate at the SCP Foundation's containment facilities. We need to reel back several centuries in the timeline to mainland Europe in 1349, where one of history's deadliest and most infamous incidents, the Black Death, was well underway. Given that everyone in this audience has now lived through a global pandemic, you know they're not exactly a picnic at the best of times. But what we went through was nothing compared to the people undergoing a true plague. 50 million people had died horrible deaths from the bubonic plague by the time it was declared over in 1353, quite literally halving Europe's population. And if those numbers don't frighten you, then you'd still be harrowed by the pure hell that was unfolding on the ground level. In the cobbled streets of medieval Europe, the oozing, pus-covered dead were laying out in the streets, attracting flies. Rats, furry carriers of deadly infected fleas, scurried from walkway to drain, spreading destruction in their wake. Every other door had a black X written across the wood in tar, signifying that the house's inhabitant had succumbed already. Men pushed wooden carts through the streets loaded with corpses, a job that would make them shockingly wealthy men. By the time it was all over, entire towns were wiped out, just empty buildings with more of those black X's on the doors. Everywhere you went, you could hear the moans of low pain or the terrible screams of the aggrieved. And of course, the endless ringing of the cartmen's bells and their repeated chants of, "Bring out your dead, bring out your dead." In the thick of it all were the plague doctors, physicians wearing heavy robes and leather masks full of pleasant-smelling plant cuttings. Why? Because at the time we hadn't discovered germs, and so scientists at the time believed in miasma theory. The root of all disease was a foul gas that emanated from rotten matter underground, like corpses. So by taking in the pleasant smells of flowers, they could stave off the stench that was causing the disease. It probably goes without saying at this point that plenty of these masked human physicians succumbed to the very same plague that they were trying and failing to combat. They were often, at best, glorified witch doctors plying a trade based on guesswork. They had about as much expertise in actually treating the plague as the men pushing the carts full of corpses in the streets outside. But one of these doctors was not like the others. The plague doctor we would later come to know as SCP-049 strode into a plague house in southern France. It was a house that was said to contain a family of 12, all of them dead or at least in the process of dying. That didn't seem to faze him. He clutched his leather doctor's bag as a brave knight clutched the hilt of his sword when charging into battle. He would not let this disease win. The family had called for doctors to attend them days ago, when most of them were still in the realm of the living. But with the volume of cases popping up across the country, regular physicians were still in short supply. One would be able to reach them by tomorrow, most likely. But then it would already be too late, and they'd be tarring an X onto the family's door. Luckily, a decidedly irregular physician was still in the vicinity. He walked past the corpses, they were beyond his help now, and found the patriarch of the home, a weaver named Gerard, who was still barely clinging to life.
"Oh dear," the plague doctor said. "It is a terrible shame that I could not have gotten here sooner. Perhaps more of your family would have been saved."
Gerard wept quietly, his neck a painful mess of purple-black buboes. He begged the doctor for relief from his pain. He just wanted the endless hurting to stop and to be with his family again. And on this, the good doctor was happy to oblige him.
"Rest now, and know that your sacrifice will be a vital stepping stone in combating the terror of the pestilence, my friend. Your contribution shall not be forgotten."
He gently touched Gerard on the forehead, and the man suffered an instant, painless death. His vital signs simply stopped, and his body went limp on the wooden floor of his home, like the rest of his family. Just like that, the plague doctor was the only living being remaining in the house. It was part of his obligation that, in the end, his work must always be done alone. This is the first major reason that it would absolutely suck to be SCP-049. His anomalous ability to kill anything that he touches, a passive, anomalous quality that he's unable to turn off. Because of this, he must always hold anyone he truly cares about at an arm's length, or he could risk killing them like he has killed so many others. You can only imagine the inner torment of a creature that has devoted its life to wiping out sickness and healing the innocent, but is also inherently a creature of death. But when it's caused by his anomalous touch, death is never really the end for the plague doctor. No, it's just another part of the process. His endless war to conquer the pestilence that he often refers to but never seems able to fully communicate. With Gerard and his family passed on, there was nothing left for the plague doctor to do except get back to work. He placed his doctor's bag on the floor and opened the clasp, ready to draw out any number of strange, ancient, and arcane instruments, which he would use to act out the next part of the process. It was something that centuries later would still baffle the researchers and technicians of the SCP Foundation. He would work through the night on the family of Gerard, studying their corpses and using his instruments to, well, let's say, modify them. Soon enough, he gets to the fruit of this process, reinducing a form of life into his patients, now free of the terrible pestilence. But the process was still flawed. It needed refinement. No matter how much progress he was able to make, that terrible disease, ever evolving, ever worsening, with the plague just being its latest form, was somehow always a few steps ahead. The next morning, a human doctor arrived at the house, dressed in a similar outfit to the future SCP-049, with some key differences we'll get into soon. He approached, medical wand in hand, to avoid having to directly touch any of the infected patients when he didn't have to, of course, and rapped on the wooden door with his knuckles. "Do come in," came the plague doctor's voice from the inside. "I believe I've done all I can do here. Still, there are always the next ones." Strange, that voice sounded healthy. The human doctor stepped inside and gasped into the fragrant beak of his leather mask. What he saw in that house was nothing short of a living nightmare. Horrific mutilated corpses, skin gray or green with rot, surgically modified into unnatural shapes. But the worst part was that these corpses were not dead. They seemed to wander and stumble around the house, their movements stilted and freakish. Was this what remained of the Weaver Gerard and family? In amongst them all was the plague doctor, dressed in a long black robe, his ivory mask stark white. Was he the one behind this terrible barbarism?
"Ah, a fellow man of science. Splendid," the plague doctor said. "Perhaps we can compare notes as contemporaries in the field."
This would not happen. Instead, the human doctor screamed at the top of his lungs and ran back to the nearest village. He had seen such horrible things in the course of his service as a plague medic, but that was beyond them all. In the village, he breathlessly told the tale of the horrors he'd seen to a local magistrate, who summoned up every soldier in town to lead a raiding party towards the house. There they found the doctor and his terrible experiments. He was still taking fastidious notes on everything he'd done when he found himself at the business end of several pikes. The men demanded that the plague doctor submit to arrest and take off his mask so that he could be identified. This was a request that he needed to humbly deny, and for good reason too. You see, the plague doctor wasn't wearing a mask. Foundation X-rays taken centuries later revealed that the hard white mask was indeed made of bone, but it was not ivory. The beaked visage was the avian skull structure of the creature itself. But the soldiers weren't interested in hearing this explanation. Instead, they got closer, ready to give this heretical madman a violent end if they needed to. But this seemed to provoke the rage of the deceased Gerard and the rest of his zombified family. They all gave guttural roars that could give you nightmares for a week and ran towards the assembled soldiers, arms outstretched and ready to kill. As the soldiers battled the undead, all that was left for the plague doctor to do was flee into the night, carrying only his doctor's bag and his leather-bound research book. He would need to continue his research in secret elsewhere now. The other option was falling victim to the persecution of the small-minded folks who could never understand the great value of his work again and again and again. This is the next major thing that absolutely sucks about being SCP-049. While you're truly, in your heart of hearts, believing that you're doing this for the greater good, there's a lot of people who don't see it that way. In fact, to the untrained eye, it seems that the Plague Doctor's supposed cure for the pestilence is just killing his victims with a deadly touch, then reshaping their body into a disgusting and aggressive zombie. And that's a difference of opinion that can be hard to swallow for most people. As a result, the Plague Doctor can never really stay anywhere for long. In his quest for the cure, he's constantly getting chased by angry mobs who think he's a disgusting monster performing crimes against nature itself. If you're a social butterfly, the thought of forever being an outcast in society probably wouldn't do wonders for your self-esteem. But to the Plague Doctor, doing the right thing, which is and always will be curing the pestilence and saving humanity from its ravages, is more important than being liked by others or living a comfortable life. And it's probably for the best that he thinks that, because a comfortable life is something he's unlikely to ever know. His life went on in this cycle: cure, experiment, be discovered, be chased out of town, for centuries. Then one day, something changed in the small town of Montauban in southern France. There he was discovered yet again while working on his experiments, in a house full of zombified people who he'd revived after giving them his fatal touch. But this time, he hadn't been found by soldiers or the local police, but by the SCP Foundation, who were following up on reports of mysterious disappearances in the area. A mobile task force allowed them to gun down the undead monsters that the Plague Doctor had been working on and drag the anomaly himself into custody. However, a few of the field agents were killed in the process, some by the zombies, some as a result of skin-to-skin contact with the Plague Doctor. And that is a shockingly easy mistake to make. Much like the Plague Doctor's mask is just actually his real face grown out of real bone, the rest of his robes and gloves are also just extensions of the creature's skin. He's technically always naked, and just happens to appear physically similar to a Plague Doctor by pure happenstance. There were certain benefits in becoming SCP-049, an anomaly in the custody of the SCP Foundation. A guaranteed bed every night, regularly provided rations of crusty bread and hard cheese, and for a time, a stipend of carcasses to research. But even with the benefits, there's one undeniable thing that still absolutely sucks about the arrangement. While SCP-049 thinks of himself as a grand and noble scientist, to his jailers at the SCP Foundation, he's just another prisoner. They humor what they see as his delusions of grandeur, but really, that's all it is. None of them view him as an equal, or take any of his ideas or theories all that seriously. They're only polite to him insofar as it helps to keep him a placid prisoner, and when words fail, they'll instead employ a lavender-scented gas to pacify him. And of course, if that fails, they can always have heavily armed guards strong-arm the anomalous doctor into line. And on top of this, the longer that SCP-049 has been in Foundation custody, the worse his life has gotten. Originally, he was given human cadavers to continue his experiments, but after some unfortunate incidents, these were forbidden. After that, he was given animal carcasses, but he implored the Foundation to reconsider, saying they wouldn't be sufficient for the kind of research that needed to be done. After a researcher working on his case was killed in a pestilence-related incident, even the animal carcasses were denied. And what could suck more than being an entity who was put on the Earth to achieve one singular goal, to study cures for the pestilence, and being denied even the ability to do that? Now check out SCP-049, What Actually Is the Pestilence? The Plague Doctor Questions and Theories, and SCP-049, The Plague Doctor, Everything You Need to Know, for more.